Welcome to Aarhus School of Architecture. For those who are not students or colleagues here, welcome to the second lecture in our recently initiated lecture series titled Life Terrains, a series of lectures in which we, over the coming years, will invite a whole gamut of strange fellows, thinkers, practitioners, artists, even activists, to help us investigate the many dimensions, the many silhouettes, so to say, of human and natural landscapes in a time of global ecological mutations. Precisely a month ago, we had the great pleasure, the privilege of welcoming historian of science, Frédéric Aitoiti, and theater director Duncan Evenou, who gave us a thought-provoking talk, a reminder of how the intrusion of Gaia somehow calls for new ways, new tools, new methods of mapping landscapes, new cartographies of territories that brings us closer to an understanding not only of their extension, but also of their active ingredients and their reactive intensities. Finally, Frédéric and Duncan reminded us such explorations, such new, novel explorations of territories, consisting of and continuously remade by the living beings, cannot, or we in this process cannot underestimate the arts, and more specifically theater. Theater, they argued, have always been world-making and world-investigating spaces, laboratories, spaces investigating again the size, the shape, the silhouette of space, crucial for understanding the invention of the modern cosmology of the 17th century, and essential resources, essential devices for reinventing another cosmology at a time in history when no longer we can understand nature as being in the background of the human comedy. Now, another art form that historically has been absolutely monumental in thinking about, in investigating, in shaping our understanding of nature, of landscapes, of our life terrains, has been that of painting. As those of you who were here last month might remember, when launching this series, we began with an emblematic painting by Schiele, his famous painting, The Blind or Levitation, arguing that today this painting no longer only reads as a transition, or a depiction, of a transition between life and death, but also as a very forceful reminder of the human being's necessity of reconnecting to the land, to the soil, to the territories that conditions its subsistence. In other words, another layer of meaning has been added to this monumental painting, making it a powerful trope for reconsidering the human condition in an age of ecological change. Another example, if you may allow me, one that I discussed recently with students here at the school, a bit closer to home, the famous painting by Edvard Munch, The Scream, Skriget, that also takes on a slightly different meaning than it did yesterday. So, that's the question. What does a blood-red sky today signify? How does it relate to a distorted human face, cramped together in despair, fear, and in anguish? What sort of trouble is this human face caught up in? What is the reason behind its pain? What sort of connection to the world has left him wrecked in exhaustion and anxiety with no other possibility than resorting to the most animalistic of all emotive actions, that of the scream? Now, if one gazes, again, as I said, at this painting today, one cannot help but think, to use a metaphor from painting, this question has been recomposed, that novel aspects of this painting are beginning to show themselves, making it again a useful trope for reconsidering the human condition in a time of the Anthropocene. In what way? Well, the old times and the times of yesterday, when looking at this painting, being either as a normal viewer, as an art expert, an art critic, one would probably say that in the blood-red sky you would find a sort of representation of the anguish, the anxiety, the dread running through the cramped up human figure. The chaotic landscape, so to say, was a metaphor for the pain of the human being, matching in intensity an inner life splintered to pieces in a world devoid of meaning, certainty, stable anchor points. But when gazing at this painting today, in a very confusing moment of history, one cannot help but think, at least I cannot help but think, that this human face is distorted in agony because he has created the blood-red sky, because he has created a burning sky threatening his own existence, because he is the cause of it, because the blood-red sky is the consequence of his own actions. The human being, the figure there, is agitated because the horizon is literally melting and because his own being is the root cause of it. If you have any doubts about my little reinterpretation yet, try imagining some 16-year-old kid being dragged through the museum halls of Oslo National Museum by well-meaning parents before stumbling on this painting without any prior knowledge about it. Facing the screen for the first time, what does the kid see? I'm pretty sure, I'm completely sure, that it would at least be somehow climate related. In fact, it would not surprise me if our young friend from Norway simply thinks that the person on the bridge must be living in Greece, in California, or wherever wildfires these days cause the sky to turn red, the suit to fall like rain, and humans to fear and to flee the unintended side consequences of its own actions. From an infinite stream passing through nature to a finite nature passing through the human stream, an interconnected chaos of natural and emotional landscapes, and a depiction of the simultaneous trembling of the human being and the earth. Affects of soil, soul, and society that I'm pretty sure will only intensify in the decades to come. Of course, it's a little hypothesis. You might agree, disagree, subject to these reinterpretations, but no matter the case, then what both the works of Munch and Schiele reminded us is how enormously forceful, how enormously strong painting is when it comes to thinking about, investigating, giving form to the contours of the human condition, to human and natural landscapes, and to the relationships between them. For this reason, when we initiated this lecture series, it was a priority, top of our list, so to say, to invite a painter. And for that reason, it is a great pleasure and a great pride, with great pride, that we can today present a talk by artist George Rouy, who is visiting us from Kent in England. Emerging as a leading figure of a new generation of painters, Rouy's dynamic use of the human figure in relation to the space it occupies, and his explorations of questions such as the human condition exactly, identity, embodiment, disorder, disorientation, speaks like few other artists to the confusions, to the extremities, and the complexities of a very weird 21st century. Articulating a vocabulary of painting which is as distinctive as it is visceral, Rouy's signature style of painting are defined by contradictions such as stasis and flow, precision and indeterminacy, and working in this manner, Rouy's work somehow undermines the human body and its environment as fixed, distinct units, proposing instead a landscape of the human figure that is constantly transformed, constantly reimagined, constantly redefined by its relationship with itself, with others, and with the space that it inhabits. Last year, when I attended the rehearsals of Rouy's highly acclaimed collaborative performance Bodysuit that he created with choreographer Sharon Eyal, I jotted down in my notebook on my iPad or iPhone that what was at stake was bodies transforming space, while bodies themselves were transformed. Metamorphosis, frictions, so to say, of bodies negotiating in space and with space what it means to be a human being. I don't know if George agrees with this, but I don't think it's a bad description of what is also at stake in many of his paintings. And what is certain is that these sorts of questions are as vital, as important to pose in the arts as they are in the human sciences. Following his similarly acclaimed recent solo exhibitions Bleed 1, Bleed 2 in London and Los Angeles with gallerist Hauser and Worth, Rouy is currently working on a new painting for Copists, which is a collaborative exhibition between Musée du Louvre and Centre Pompidou Metz, a painting inspired by the Massacre of Chios by Eugene Delacroix. If I'm not wrong, George will tell us, then he will, in the end of his talk today, speak about this new project and how it relates to the question of landscapes, what it means to inhabit them, and our relationship with them again. But first, drawing on his own practice, Rouy will speak about his relationship with the artistic process, image making, and the human figure. I'm not sure that Rouy will talk about it, but he is also the inventor of a very important rule, which is the only one Negroni rule that you can ask him about afterwards, a rule that has had maybe not as big of an influence as his paintings, but also shows and proves that he's a very funny and nice person. So I'm hoping that you would help me say welcome to George here, give him a warm welcome at the School of Architecture at the Live Terrains lecture series, and I hope you will enjoy the talk. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to be invited to Denmark. This is a first for me, and I never thought when I chose to be a painter that I would be now standing in front of a crowd talking about the work. So, yeah, you know, me and Nikolaj met in Paris nearly coming up to 2 years now, and we met at a bar, and we got talking about life, and you know, we rarely knew about each other's work. Actually, we met just through acquaintances, and I think over the time, having many talks with Nikolaj over our time together, it's more and more. It's made more and more sense about my work, and I hope with himself as well. And it's really nice to have the support of people like himself as an artist. That can be quite a lonely career sometimes, because you're on your own in the studio a lot of the time with your own head, and sometimes not all the answers. So yeah, I thought it'd be a good place to start by just talking about my early relationship to art in general, and also my education. I studied at Camberwell College of Art and studied fine art painting, and there at the time figuration was not exactly in vogue. It was not the thing that anyone was doing, and especially my tutors weren't figurative painters. So I felt quite lost during my 3 years at university, and I felt like through that kind of journey of trying ceramics and basically not painting too much during those 3 years, when I left, I had to kind of recalibrate, and it was a hard moment for me where, you know, the realities of setting in where you have to get a job, and then the studio time is limited. So with that initial stage and kind of having to refine my love for painting, and also try to understand what I wanted to say and what I wanted to be, and what my art was about, because I always had a love for making things. Whether it was good art was questionable at the time, but I think through this larger process, maybe what I'm trying to say is that there is looking back now, there is this wider sense of a process that happens over years, and I think when me introducing the work to you, you'll see about 5 years of slow shifts. So this painting, and I'm just going to scroll through the paintings as we move through, but this was like the first painting that I really felt like I was starting to find where I wanted the work to be. There's a claustrophobic feel, there is a balance to the painting. There's normally a balance to all the works where they are situated within a non-space. This one is seated, and then this is where I started just before moving into oil paint. So there was a stage where I was only painting in acrylic, and although it's an amazing medium for kind of a flatness, and you can build up layers a bit like glazing with this kind of the old masters would do. And at the time I didn't have that much money, so it was a really efficient way of doing a lot of quick paintings and learning quickly, rolling them up and making more. So this was the first one where I really started to find where I wanted to go, especially with the face and these kind of more abstracted areas and in the hands. But then this happened a few months later, and this was my first oil painting that I did, switching from oil to acrylic. And it was a really nice time for me because I'd spent 10 years in London during my time at university, and then also then trying to become an artist and kind of survive in that. This was the first set of paintings, or came from the first set of paintings out of when I moved out of London. So I now live in Kent, and I'm still in the same studio as I was. And for me, having the distance from the city, and I live in a kind of countryside area, and then having that with a new studio and then shifting to a new medium opened up all these new possibilities. And it's a beautiful medium, oil paint. It's a challenging one, but what was great is I could apply all the things I'd learned over the years in acrylic, the kind of the flatness, the layering, the kind of brushworks, but now I had this quite pliable, quite instant and dense and kind of vibrant medium, which is oil paint, that I was then in some ways battling with, but also utilizing. The shift, or through this process of kind of discovery into the figuration, where before I was making they were kind of, how would I put it? They were kind of a bit more caricature, less kind of realistic, let's say. This was where I started to really kind of go seriously into the body and into groupings and into the relationships with space. Again, there is these kind of clear areas around and these groupings of figures. And also engagement into the lens and photography. I am a great lover of Gerhard Richter and Cecily Brown and Jenny Saville, and they're all artists that in some way use the photograph and the lens. And I think what's amazing about the lens is it's not life drawing. I used to do a lot of life drawing at college, and as much as it's a great thing to do and it's a great challenge, in some ways things can become more exaggerated. And what's great about the lens is that there is this set format that you can kind of almost have a flatness to it, and there's also familiarity because we're saturated with images constantly. So with all these areas, again with this one, these abstract marks with the oil work became much more pushed in because, and as we go through the talk, these areas become much more prominent, and they become tools in which the kind of the imagination happens as well. And again, moving through these are all works that happened within in a space of maybe 2 years. Just 1 second, I'm just going to check my notes. And I think something I struggled with at the start again of this kind of discovery into the figure is you got asked the questions, and especially at university, is about the kind of the identity of the body. And through doing and through this time of me making, the question become more and more present. Who are the people within the work? The ethnicity, the gender. And at the time, it was quite scary to start to enter these topics, because it was never something I felt comfortable or even knew how to answer. And I felt like in some ways that was a question I had to ask myself about what is my relationship to the figures in the works, because they're not portraits and they're not of people, but I'm engaging with the body. And what I discovered that through doing this and doing a lot of exhibitions, these questions were becoming more and more present. And at first I think my own critique is that I would shy away from, for instance, explaining the gender of the work or explaining the ethnicity. During this time, I think there was a tendency to categorize people, artists, or what it means to be. All these things are forever changing modes of being. And there's one story I had when I did my first show in London, where I did the show, and then I got approached in the street by this guy, and he basically felt very offended by my depiction of certain ethnicities. And at the time, I think I was like 21 or 22, and I was mortified by the fact that what the exhibition I'd done had such a negative connotations to someone, and the way that they can apply themselves into the work or put themselves into the work is something I'd never really asked myself and never really realized my work would have that effect. So that was a real shift in my judgment of I need to treat the subjects with a sensitivity, and I need to also start to think about what is my relationship to doing all this stuff, and for a few years I was a bit hesitant after that to even put any sense of an ethnicity into the work. And as we go through, you'll see that slowly starts to loosen, and my kind of judgment over time has become more, it's become maybe more mature. And so this was a show I did in New York a few years ago at Nikolaj Schultz Gallery. And this was like the first step really for myself to start to think about taking, to a certain extent, a risk of including the black figure or a person of different ethnicities, the female form, and committing to these to these subjects. As a white male painter going through the university system, there was always this anxiety and this legacy of the white male painter, of the object and objectifying the human form. And in some ways that I had to loosen my judgment and think about, actually this is about the human essence of all of us. We're all in this together, and this is a study into the human beings. And I need to a certain extent, in order to push through that, I need to let go of that anxiety and, to a certain extent, accept if there is a confrontation or whatever conversation is around that. And that, in some ways, my judgment shift from feeling anxious to then it's kind of a duty, not in a noble terms, but in a way that in order to make great figurative paintings, I need to take that step. So this is a painting I made last year, and it's in some ways it was a direct one of the most political paintings I'd made at the time. The war in Gaza had just started, and I couldn't help but feel that in the studio my position was endlessly changing as we move through in life. You mature and you change, and we get a certain sense that this isn't business as usual anymore. I'm a painter that's thinking about the form and about emotion, about the body, and I couldn't help but start to think about that. I wouldn't say I'm a political painter at all, but there is a sense that all these things come in, all these things have to be there. The work is made in the time we're in. It's not made upon reflection. So with that, this was the painting I made, one of the paintings I made. I'm hesitant to say that it's a direct painting of the war, but what I would say is that it's clearly made in the same time. There is an anxiety to it. There's a claustrophobic feeling. There's a heat. There's to a certain extent, of violence and a masculine feel to the work as well. And then moving into, so this is a painting from the show last year that I did with Howes and Wirth. I'll move through some of these. So the monochrome works, this is a new edition that I'll talk about in a bit later, but these two works, I feel that they were exhibited alongside each other. And the great thing about, I've always wanted to think about the monochrome kind of historically. There's the kind of, you think of Picasso's the Guernica, for instance, and this kind of almost kind of unconsciously has this kind of cubist feel to this work, which was never the intention, but it kind of just ended up that way. And what this is silver primed linen. I think this one, or linen on, and then I'm using charcoal and acrylic paint. And the beautiful thing about the charcoal on the silver is that because the charcoal is so matte, and then you've got this illumination behind, when you see it in person, there is this sense of, well, as I said, illumination and light and dark, and how the light reacts to the paintings. And one of the first paintings I fell in love with was a painting by Crystal Feely, and it was at the Tate Britain, and it's one of his blue paintings, and it's basically charcoal and I think ultramarine, but it might be more Prussian blue. And it's a very, very dark painting, and it has, again, playing with that idea of illumination, with the charcoal being the matte, and then this glossiness of the oil paint. So in some ways, that painting's always stuck with me through my kind of creative career. So in some ways, this is a kind of a semi-reference to the essence of that painting as such. So alongside all the kind of in my own head about what it is to be, to be human, and the body and my relationship to the figure and what I'm trying to be as an artist, I encountered about 6 years ago. So during this whole process of this pivotal shift in the work, I met the choreographer Sharon Ayal. And I met her at one of her performances in London. And when I first saw her work, so basically the painting, the dance is a set of dancers existing in a pretty much a non-space. There is no set, and the costume is very minimal. But there is this really emotive music, kind of almost like club music, and then you have this collection of dancers responding and interacting throughout the work. And how I like to describe it is it's a very, very intuitive, bodily piece of work that exists within the void and the abstract. And after walking away and after I'd kind of got obsessed with her work a little bit and felt like all those things that she was touching on in the work was exactly what I've been trying to think about and wanting to achieve. And in some ways it completely cut through it kind of reinforced my ambitions and gave me a clear clarity of chasing a feeling and an intuitive aspect of the work, which I don't think spoke about much. And when I was at university, there was never anything about feeling inspired, or nothing about the intuitive response to art, or to the emotional response to art and music and poetry, whatever it is. And I think I learnt a lot just through the feeling it made in myself. So we became friends throughout those 6 years, and during those 6 years, my work changed, and she carried on. She's a bit older, and she's done the performances. But then a few years ago, I asked her to be a part of a kind of more experimental, to collaborate basically, in one of the galleries in London. And it was a really amazing experience for me to work with her and the dancers. I got to know the dancers a little bit more. And then we named it Bodysuit. So that was the third iteration. And then from that, we managed to get funding and also trust from others to build a bigger and a larger piece, this is a shot from the LA. This was showcased in LA a few months ago. Well, a few months ago. And what it is 5 dancers that again, and then there's this mirrored floor, and the idea was I wanted the dancers to exist, kind of push that sense that they are in this void, and they have a relationship with light and their reflection, and then there's this painting that's placed on the floor. And I designed the music for this piece as well, and when building the piece with Sharon, there was these clear chapters, and my concern was that her work is so complete as it is, without any intervention of myself coming in there. And what it really needs to feel like you can add something and bring something to life, and 2 worlds were emerging, not just fighting and pushing against each other. And I think the reason why this was so successful is the chapters of light. There was a large 4-meter painting that was situated on the floor with the mirror. The dancers had their set stage of a kind of a sequence that lasted about 35 minutes, which I helped do with Sharon, and she was kind of responding directly to my work, but also it was kind of this symmetry where I was also thinking about everything to do with her work. And the light really brings the bridge between the figures and then the painting. And when doing this, I really felt that I needed to remove the figures from the work, from the painting, because I didn't want the figures in the paintings are so static, it would almost feel like it kills the piece. All the life was in the body of the dancers, the sweat, the breathing, the kind of almost the fragility and the mortality of the dancers. That's what makes it so potent. And live performance, that is why it's so amazing. So I did not want to feel like there was any distraction other than you have this kind of one organism that's coexisting. You have the painting that's getting influenced by the lighting. You have the music that's influenced in the dance, and then you have the mirror that almost encompasses everything. So then, reflecting upon that, I started to think about abstraction and my own anatomy within the paintings. And this is always something I've been wanting to... It's almost kind of always been there, the relationship with myself and my hand and my body, because the paintings are very big. But I'd never really jumped into complete abstraction. And the painting for Sharon and the bodysuit piece was the first completely abstract work. And how I had to approach that was I needed to think about it as still a figurative painting as such, but it's about my relationship to the canvas. It's about my arms, it's about speed. Speed is something I always talk about in relation to the mark making, and gravity, and how I read paintings is an element of or a mark is an element of time. It can take 2 seconds, it could take 5 seconds, or the brush out, it could take months, like with layers. So there is this element of time. And how I started with this painting was with the silver primed linen again, but I was using charcoal, and it was a powdered charcoal, and I would apply it with a dry brush and dip it almost like a powder. And what was amazing about the charcoal is it's so reactive, it's so much more instant than paint. Paint at some moments will drip, or it will kind of run out as such. Whereas the charcoal, what it does is when you stuck it against the wall and you apply it, it almost creates this veil as it trickles down, and you get this layering of this kind of veil of charcoal. And because it's like quite earthly and dark and kind of dense, it created such a kind of beautiful relationship to the surface. So that led me on to a lot of new discoveries within the paintings. And this was one it's called Rib Cage, and this was exhibited in LA recently. So with these, so you have the dance piece, you have the figurative paintings, and then you have now this abstraction. And what I've always wanted to do as well is to somehow bring these worlds, or to be able to be an artist that can have a breadth of ideas in the studio. So you have the extremes. For one moment, you've got because I work on 15 paintings at the same time, I want to be able to go from an abstract work into a figurative painting that's taken a month or a series of months, and then new paintings that are instant. And keeping that energy in the studio, and keeping that excitement and that almost life to the work is really important. So you can move from this to something else. And when thinking about the shows, and when thinking about how I want to move forward with exhibitions, is this needs to be explained to the audience as well. And there needs to be some correlation between these separate and quite wide ideas. So when this was exhibited alongside all the other paintings in LA, I think it was the first time I'd kind of explored that, and I think it worked really well. And I think, as I said, I think what's good is that you have the viewer can look at this kind of static painting of figures and then move to there, and it's almost like a breath, or this kind of palette cleanse when you move to a painting like this. And then as you move through the space, you're then going back to this one, and it's in your head. So then you start to look at the marks in some of the other paintings, and it all starts to equate to this larger set of inquiries that aren't narrowing down. So within the body of work as well, something I've always been fascinated by and loved in historical works is how you can create multiple figures all interacting. And for instance, the Wrath of Medusa is a perfect example of this, and it's one that I always go back to when I refer to these mass or figures in mass. Is because with this one you've got the drama, you've got quite a lot of information really. There's a lot of hands, there's a lot of legs, there's a lot of limbs, and there is a narrative as such. So when approaching multiple figures or these mass figures in my paintings, I have this kind of tendency, or this kind of rule is that I want them to feel instant. You need to look at it, and it can just fill you without having to bully you with the information. I don't want to bombard people with too many hands and limbs that feel chaotic, or there's a chaos, but there is sometimes when you can look at paintings, you get a bit lethargic, and it kind of tires you out just even looking at it. So something I'm always judging in the studio is that clarity, and that's through reduction really. This is a painting I made a few years ago, and this was kind of like the first step into that, where I'm thinking about how to include the form, have this dramatic feel, but at the same time you have the movement and you have the energy, and it feels contemporary. It has this reference to the kind of classical, but it's also energized. So these were made 2 years apart. So this was the first kind of attempt, and then this was the one recently shown in LA. And linking this to the Raft and Medusa, what I love about the Raft and Medusa is that in some ways it feels very monochrome. There isn't the color palette isn't that wide, and I really, really enjoy that painting for that reason, because in some ways it has this timelessness to it. And more and more so, I think I've been limiting my palette to these splashes of illumination, but at the same time there is this evenness to the spread. So here you have, well, a lot of different figures going on. You have about 6 figures. You have this kind of body that's kind of spread, that's very, very distorted now and removed. Like, a lot of these areas have been removed. How I paint now is I probably apply a lot of layers, and it's through reduction I get to the image rather than just choosing to remove it. And sitting with it in the studio and just feeling it, that's how I get to that conclusion. And again, this is another one, but thinking about this within the monochrome feel now. So again, you've got the set of figures that are all kind of exist in this middle space, and then you have these kind of bottom tiers that are left for this feeling of almost dispersion and the bleed, as I call it. It's maybe worth saying with these actually, is I normally work in tiers and think about the paintings in these kind of 3 tiers. Most of information is normally in this middle tier. This top tier allows this bit to breathe, and then this bit is where the sense of weight or weightlessness comes into play, where you don't want to bombard this with information, and you want it to feel like there is an instantness, a lightness to the area. Similar with this part. Again, you've got the 3 tiers. This middle section, this top section. And I think, when I think about these paintings, these more kind of mass works, I'm thinking about the relationships as kind of singular, how people kind of keep their own autonomy, but at the same time there is this endless, I say, bleeding out into everyone with its ideas, with its even the heat and the elements, and this way that we're all situated in this world and endlessly reacting, and there's this kind of vibration that occurs and distortion that occurs. Again, this was shown in the same show, the Bleed Part 2. And so you start to see now there is this a rhythm through the work. There is these same inquiries and these same sets of lines of inquiries. There's kind of it's narrow, but at the same time there is this breadth to it as well. Here, there's this kind of secret hand that kind of pushes across, which a lot of people don't notice when they first see it. I think what I wanted to do with these is that, again, when I talk about an evenness to the paintings and how I judge when a painting is finished, is sometimes you don't want areas to feel too dominant, like the hand. You don't want it to feel like the main feature is the hand. It needs to sit there, and there needs to be value. There needs to be a value to every mark. So this area can just be as important as this thigh, or this top section is just as important as this more kind of blacked out kind of abstract area, or this secret kind of hand drawing that's happening here and here. So again, kind of thinking about history and the time we're in and my relationship to myself and the world. I visited Madrid last year, and I saw the 3rd of May by Goya. And I think this is such a incredible painting for various reasons. I think there is this area for me is haunting. There is this sense of surrender and despair, and I think can't help reflect on the world in its current state and the anxiety and the yeah. So when thinking about that painting, I kind of started to look into that and to, in some ways, recreate it or think about my relationship to that painting through history and in the times we're in now. So similarly, you have this I almost see this as almost like a defense, almost like protection, as you see here. But also as almost like a surrender. And then obviously with the hand and this green area, at first I wanted there to be something in the fingers. I wanted it to feel like it was like almost like what a gun's like. It's like this magic wand. It has this sense that it's detached from us. You point it and it goes. It's a kind of a feeling of an explosion. So the final mark I made was this green explosion of pigment. And with that, I think I started to think about how there's this collective care. You get carried into life, out of life. There's a sense that we sometimes need to feel elevated or we're being pushed down. And I think this one for me was this first kind of look into that. There's this kind of circular motion that's happening. Again, you have the tears, but it's all situated around this. And these were exhibited. This one was exhibited in London alongside this one. These were in the same room. And they're both, in some ways, an inquiry into the same thing. And it's about the idea of being carried. For this one, there's a weight to this top section. The mass is here being pushed down onto the leg into the ground. There's a sense that this is more of there's a heaviness to the figures and the form. Whereas this one, there's almost a sense of a weightlessness and a suspension. So in going on to the portrait, you might have noticed that as the paintings move on, less faces have occurred in these group scenes. It was a clear decision, I think, over the last few years to slowly phase out the faces in the larger group scenes, because I was concerned that they were too much of an anchor to the eye, and I wanted it to be about the body, less so about the portrait or the human in it, or the characters, let's say. So this was, I did quite a few years ago now, this one. But this is where I started to distort and think about that. These are my first attempts at that, to try to think about the space, what the head occupies, and how it can feel very psychological. And how with this one, for instance, this groinal area links to this top area. Again, this kind of completely erasure. And then I think this is kind of what I'm explaining really about there is no sense of a face here. There's a complete erasure of the face. It becomes more about the hands and more about the feet now, and that has become more of a kind of presence within the work rather than these faces. But then so with that, what I did is I kind of just took the faces and just took them and put them into their own realm. So now I have the group scenes, I have the dance, I have the abstraction, and now I have the portraits, or the anti-portrait as I call them. So when I'm in the studio, I have these 4 sets of worlds going on, simultaneously. And how I approach these aren't portraits, as I said, but they are arranged and constructed the same way as the larger forms. They're kind of collaged images, found faces or computer-generated faces that I manipulate. So there is this sense that there is this, what I really like is there's a sense that there's a catalyst to an image that gets like 5 times removed before it reaches the final painting. And with that, I'm interested in how we can apply meaning and we can apply this sense of soul, or you can still see a painting and project yourself into these works, but ultimately these are of no one. They don't exist. As I said, Gerhard Richter is an amazing example of how he uses the actual photograph itself as the reference. So that is the object. And I think thinking about that, how technology has become such a part of the world, but also my practice. In some ways, I'm reflecting upon that as well. What is real? The internet, these found images, the digitalized world, the avatars, AI to a certain extent, although it's not really about that. But okay. So now moving on to this is the last chapter, but so the landscape and my position with this, and moving kind of forward, and my gathering after, again, when I said about meeting Nikolaj, we discussed potentially doing a show where we explore the landscape and what the landscape means now within painting, within art, but culturally. And simultaneously to this, I got asked to recreate a painting from the Louvre, and I chose the Massacre of Chios by Delacroix. And it is a scene of war, and it's a scene where there is no heroes. There is this horizon line. There is the sense that it is in an island, so that it is situated on land. But then with that you have the death, you have the, in this case, the kind of the colonizers or the invaders. And when you see it, it's a very large painting. This central two figures are almost symmetrical, and everything kind of circles around them. I didn't quite notice that. I saw this painting a few times, and this is such an amazing image just in itself. And I think why I chose this one is, again, as I said, it's a scene of war. It's got the relationship to the land it inhabits, but also the horizon line and the grouping of figures it feels like I can reference it very well within my work. It feels like there is a dialogue there. And I thought I'd show you, although the painting hasn't been made, I wanted to show you maybe part of the process of how I create images and the process of digital images before they become paintings. I don't really show this to many people, but I thought it's important for, after we've done this long talk, to at least kind of get a kind of a visual idea of how I create. So these were like the first kind of deconstructed images I made of the paintings that what I felt that could become the recreation. And then these are now the kind of brainstorming, more focused, more kind of defined world of where these works could go. So you have different versions of this kind of, I think about these central figures, but now you have this like the reclining of going back here, I look at this figure and then these sets of figures here. I haven't included the horse. I'm still questioning whether I want to include the horse, but instead I've included these kind of mass of figures, and then these kind of the death and the kind of these void of life areas here. So this is all done on Photoshop through collage and old images I've got, references to old paintings. Yeah, that's how it starts. This is kind of the one I'm working on at the moment, or that I'm thinking about. Maybe this is starting to compositionally get there. Feels a bit more claustrophobic, which I enjoy. You've still got the sense there's a horizon line in this space, but again, there's these 3 tiers that mirror all the works. And then I thought I'd end on a painting Nikolaj wanted me to include. During one of the heat waves, I was living in Paris a few years ago when it was that really strong heat wave, and I decided, this before we knew each other, this was maybe, 2022, maybe? 2022, 23? But anyway, this is a small painting, and I just did it in my apartment, and it was I've been wanting to do a series of landscapes. Whether this was a kind of abstract, kind of gestural sense of a forest fire, or a fire as such. But I think it would end on this because I think my next line, one of my next lines of inquiry, is going to be on what is my relationship to the landscape now, after applying all those sets of methods into the figure and the journey I've been on in understanding the figure. How can then I apply that to the landscape? So I thought I'd end on this, as it is about that. But yeah, there we go. And I think we're going to do some questions if anyone wants to ask anything.
Exactly. But before that, George, I would like to say thank you for a wonderful lecture and also a wonderful window into your work, the way you think about it, and the way you do it. And that combination, I think, was really, really a treat because, and we haven't said that, this lecture today, and actually also some of the other live terrain lectures, are part of some of the courses we do in architectural teaching here. So we have many students as well here, who I'm sure will be are as thrilled as me to see also a glimpse into your workshop. I mean, how you do things, do your art. And I have the great, so thank you for that, George, really a pleasure. And I have the great honor of being the one who is moderating the questions. I have some myself, but I think I will wait and ask if any of you have questions, then please raise your hands. Claudia, thanks. In the microphone.
Yeah, thank you very much. Beautiful. I was wondering, a little bit curious about the title you give your work, and when maybe you entitle the work.
Yeah, the titles, I have this long list of notes on my phone of words I pick up or phrases. I love listening to kind of podcasts about science and bits like that. So it's more of an accumulation of different ideas that I like to kind of feed in. So I with the titles, you have to name a lot of work. So in some ways they mean a lot and don't mean much at all. But what I do like is that they are a catalyst for maybe a way of, you see the title and then you see the image, or you see the image, then you see the title. They can kind of coexist together. But I have to name a lot of paintings, so it becomes.
But some will just give you a number.
Oh well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I used to do the untitled. I could do them all untitled, but I think sometimes they need to, they need some title.
Any more?
George, I think it's really interesting to see that you make these sketches before you go up on the big canvas. This is also a way that architects work a lot. We make a quick sketch, and then we make a more detailed drawing, and then a final drawing towards the end. How much changes?
A lot, most of the time. I think through the process of creating the paintings, there is these paintings are taking longer and longer now. So I work on maybe 10, 15 paintings over a series of 4 months, 5 months. So in that time, sometimes you have to build a kind of a show on the computer, and then through that period of 4 or 5 months, they start to inform each other and things fall to the wayside and change. So there's some change a lot, some not so much, depending. It just depends. But there is still the essence of that image there. Yeah.
And so if you are also mocking up the whole show, sorry, I'm just doing 2 in a row here, but when you're mocking up the whole show, you also mentioned this thing that you're like editing the audience's experience.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
You put in this palette cleanser.
I love doing exhibitions. That's always how I've kind of enjoyed making the work, because I work in a series, and through a series you can present a set of ideas, not the singular idea. And it's also something I love to experience as well, when you can stand in a room and just kind of swirl around or move around, and you're kind of surrounded by works. That's my favourite part of it. So when I am starting a new series, I am thinking about how they all relate and how they can all sit together. I do.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's very impressive. I was just thinking, when you now end on the landscape, and I've been studying a bit of Caspar David Friedrich's way of looking at the landscape. Do you have some ideas of how you're going to approach it? I'm just thinking, as far as I understood his work, he was researching very much into the relation with the landscape, all the small bits and pieces and the skies, but in a very scientific way.
Yeah. I think I probably won't do it scientifically. I think I always prefer more emotional, of that sense. I think how I'm gonna think about it is purely about how you can create an emotion or a kind of guttural response, or as I said, an intuitive response to something, and create a potency within a painting, as well as the fact that there is a landscape. And that's maybe been the challenge, and maybe why I've not been that interested in landscapes as well, is because to a sense they are void of that sometimes. So that will be the challenge, but maybe the first starting point of that. Yeah.
Any more questions? Maybe I can do a fill-in question, then you can come up with more. So, I'm asking this as a teacher in landscape architecture. And this course that we are doing now with the 111 first-year students is exploring the potential of garden art. And I say garden art as a spatial, with that I mean a spatial art form. And in our explorations today, as late as today, we have been speaking about the concept of composition. I mean, composing. Nikolaj mentioned, you spoke about recomposing. We have to recompose. So could you maybe, now you spoke about 3 tiers, and maybe it's because I'm not that much into visual arts and, I mean, building up a composition in that way. Maybe could you reflect a bit on the concept of composition in your work? How, I mean, the importance of it, or the lack of importance of composition.
I think the balancing of the work is very important. I think that's why I spend a lot of time doing these designs, really, is you're trying to you're trying to see it in all different formats as well, and that this composition can exist on a screen, because ultimately these things get transferred to a screen. You're seeing it in person, so there is this sense of space of scale as well, being able to, navigate your eye for things that are this size, but then be able to see it on the screen where it's just completely flat and you're seeing it just as a kind of singular image. So I am thinking about on different types of scale and different types of compositions. When I paint, I normally have my phone on me with the viewfinder, and I'm normally doing both, and that's become a very integral part of the process now as well, is that you're looking through your phone, looking in real life, because it does exist in many formats, but I don't know if that answers the question, but the composition is a massive part of how, when a work is finished, I think. Yeah.
That answered it. And what I also what I hold on to there, which I will bring forward also when we discuss composing new landscapes in the river valley here, is that it's not about just composing for one scale. That's what I hear you say.
Yeah.
It's about being attentive to the fact that when you do something, like you do your visual arts and paintings here, and we do our gardens, it enters into many
dimensions.
dimensions.
Yeah, there's many dimensions for sure.
So it answered it. Thank you. More questions? You have had time to think now. Yes.
Hello. I just thought that this question of size was quite interesting, because as I was watching your presentation, I thought about this like kind of meta level of the person painting, and then the dance, and the painting, and the dance within the painting, kind of. And then I thought, like, had you ever like kind of explored size also, now that you're saying that you're curating the different pictures together?
For instance,
so they kind of like go up and down in size depending on if it's a portrait or if it's a full body painting, or like full format painting, that they kind of like follow the size or the proportions of the body. Like, would you go up and down in scale in that sense, kind of to, I don't know, impose the viewer or kind of relate to the viewer by the size of the painting?
Yeah, I think all those things I do consider. When I think about the show in its entirety, the composite or the scale of the bodies need to all exist on a similar level. I really don't like it when there's different scales in a room. So you have like a small painting with a smaller. They all kind of exist within that same scale, as I said. The portraits, when I extracted the portraits out, or the faces out, originally they were to scale, but almost extracted and just put on the wall. But I've actually enlarged them a little bit now, so they are, this is like meter 20 high, so they feel a bit larger in the space, but they have this different pull because they're in their own kind of area now. I feel it makes sense to do that. But I think thinking about the actual body itself and how I approach the body in the paintings and the different areas of the body, there's I didn't touch on it on the talk, but when you shut your eyes and you kind of just body scan and you can sense the weight or the heat of your own body, or which bits feel exaggerated in relation to others, all these kind of internalized psychological parts come out in the work as well. And I think that there's very much those sets of decisions are occurring when painting these paintings and trying to bring other things to the surface, and the viewer's focus on certain areas and the removal of others. Like, for instance, this is completely removed. Certain areas are just completely void of information. So yeah, I do think about that.
Any more questions? Yes, thanks.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I was quite overwhelmed with your work, actually. So I'm from aesthetics and culture and art history. So a question in that direction, leaving the architectural sphere of this place for a bit. This is a question for your future praxis with landscape, so maybe it's a bit difficult to answer, but let's try and see. You already mentioned and touched upon the power of representation in images. And I thought of, do you consider, maybe you even considered in your earlier work, but do you consider for your future work the power balances between landscape and human figures, human bodies in your images?
Yeah, I think when I approach this kind of recreation of the Massacre of Chios, I think there is that negotiation of how much of the landscape I want to include, and almost fighting against my tendency to not do that as well. So there is going to be a shift in composition of how I adjust to these kind of default methods I have in creating these images. In some ways, I'd like to do some paintings with the figure completely removed, so it is purely about abstraction and the landscape in its sense, and the psychological aspect of the landscape. And then maybe then there will be this merging, or there will be this fragmentation. But how I'm probably going to do this is have all this exist in the studio at the same time as trying to piece together how I approach the next stages of the inquiry into the landscape. And I'm sure, after I've just finished a few works that are not in this presentation, but there are these more panoramic, kind of abstract gestural works, and I think that's probably going to start to feed into that sense of a landscape. Yeah.
Thank you very much, George, for your brilliant talk. So again, as we've followed through your presentation here, and as you've explained yourself, you've become quite the expert in, say, understanding, exploring the dynamic processes of human beings blending into each other, transforming into something different. And what you and I are trying to work a little bit on is going towards the more natural, in scare quotes, motives, right? So what we find is no longer a human being at war with itself, so to say, but rather landscapes exhausted, decomposed, to use the term we spoke about before, destroyed, and so on and so forth. Why will we fail? What will be difficult for you with that turn?
Why?
My question is, what will be difficult for you when approaching this new question that we're trying to do together? Where should we invest?
I think the difficulty is the unknown. Also, I think the difficulty is you want it to be potent and you want it to have emotion. And that's going to be the bit. It can't just be a landscape painting. It needs to have all the elements to be a great painting, but also a kind of an experience as well. I try my hardest to make sure that the shows or the paintings, and when you encounter the works, there is this potency. So that will probably be the challenge, and allowing the viewer to kind of coexist with that challenge. I don't know. But we'll see. We'll see where the challenge... And that might not be the challenge, but we don't know. I don't know.
Okay. I think we should...
Enjoy the sun.
Wrap up and enjoy the sun. You have been traveling a long way also, George.
Yes.
Last question, because I hold a microphone. Where and when can we see your art pieces in Denmark?
Oh, yes.
Think about that. You don't
I'll
have
think
to
about
answer
it. Yeah. Maybe work something out. We can get something.
Great.
Done,
Okay, but thank you very much,
thank
George.
you. Cheers.